What is a scandal, if not an engaging story? One notable Dunmer lived a life worthy of the term salacious that gave her a unique image amongst Morrowind's royalty. Barenziah, the first queen of Morrowind, went from a refugee of imperial invasion to one of the most recognizable names in Tamriel. The conflicting tales in the public eye of her rise and rule are a key part of Barenziah's political appeal. Hello and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. My name is Scott and today we're going to be taking a look at the real Barenziah. Many sought to tell her story, either smoothing over the hazy details or embracing every controversial one. We're here to give you the uncensored truth about this Dunmer royal, barbed Khajiit penis and all. Barenziah was born to the rulers of Mournhold toward the end of the Second Era. Her birth was seen as a sign of future peace and prosperity, and her naming day was celebrated by all in the city. But the populace saw little of the wealth of the nobles. Many lived rough, like Symmachus, a young Dunmer who worked in the mines to support his sick mother. On Barenziah's naming day, he was excited for the celebrations, but his mother grew sicker than ever. This was a dark day for Symmachus, as no one would lay their healing hands on her with all the temples closed for the celebration. In a last effort, he jumped in front of the noble procession, but his plea fell on deaf ears. All he could hear was the repeating of the young noble's name, Barenziah. As his mother passed, he'd promised himself he'd make her his wife and rule over Mournhold to spite the king who refused to help. Barenziah was unaware of all of this. She was very young when Emperor Tiber Septim marched his army into Morrowind. This invasion led to the signing of an armistice between the Dunmer and the Imperials, but it came at the cost of Mournhold's destruction. The Imperial retelling of her story maintains that she and her nurse were rescued from the rubble of her once great home. In reality, the young girl was placed in the care of many strangers and soldiers before her usefulness was realized. Symmachus realized who she was, now a general in the army of Tiber Septim, and he placed the young girl in the care of Count Sven Adverson of Darkmoor, where she would be protected far from Morrowind. Even in the early pages of her story, discrepancies emerge between Imperial propaganda and Barenziah's private experiences. How the people of Tamriel see the Dark Elf woman is born from two main accounts: the biography of Queen Barenziah and the real Barenziah. The first of these was written by a number of Imperial researchers, obviously looking to create a polished image of the Queen. The more interesting story comes from private confessions of Barenziah to a friend. After all, who doesn't love to hear secrets spilled to show you that even those in power are people too? As salacious as the story was, the cover-ups, mistakes, and intimate details of her life did actually improve her perception amongst the populace. Skyrim was a cold change for the young Barenziah. Count Sven Adverson had recently been gifted the fiefdom of Darkmoor for his service to the Empire. Her life with the Count and his family was a positive one from the outside. Though many would believe she grew up well loved by those around her, Barenziah never quite fit in with the family. Skyrim's culture was very different to that of Morrowind, and the Countess Inga harbored a distaste for Dark Elves, which put Barenziah on edge. They failed to see eye to eye as Barenziah began to engage in pilfering, lying, and a little misplaced magic. In her early years, she grew quite promiscuous, enjoying the companionship of several flings, but her relationship with a young stable boy stuck. Straw, as he was called, was simple but kind and affectionate. He fell for her fast, and upon hearing her predicament, he asked Barenziah to run away with him. The offer became more tempting after a courier from the Emperor visited her, looking over her as a farmer looks over a pig he's readying for market. Fearing that the Count of Darkmoor had grown tired of her and would sell her off, the two made their escape one fine spring night. They rode as far as Whiterun together, sending their horses in another direction to lead on any who attempted to track them. Barenziah disguised herself as a boy and split up from Straw so they could enter the city without trouble. The magic she had learned helped her sneak into Whiterun unnoticed, and she met up with Straw at a local inn. There the two celebrated their daring escape, planning their next steps over the coming days. Straw ran errands in the day while she robbed houses at night, making just enough to keep the two fed and housed. Though living rough, Straw often suggested that one day they should buy a farm together, living away from the conflicts of the world that had pursued them. This dream was far from a quick reality though. They knew Whiterun was still too close to Darkmoor to stay for any length of time, so they left with a travelling caravan. Barenziah longed to return to her home in Morrowind, a home she remembered but knew little about due to her early adoption. The caravan led the young Dunmer to the city of Riften, where she would meet the Khajiit Theros. His status in the Thieves Guild intrigued her, and she sought to join to further her skills. Joining required a sponsor, and Theros was all too happy to trade a night of pleasure with the Dunmer girl for her wish. This tavern encounter lived on in infamy, giving us the famed risque tale and intimate knowledge of Khajiit genitalia. Regardless of how she did it, Barenziah had joined the Thieves Guild. She grew closer to Theros, who helped prepare her for the trials to join, and he also put her in connection with skilled magicians to learn from. Though she was initially taken with the skilled Khajiit, his charms began to wear off. They completed many heists together, but soon Theros asked that Straw and Barenziah help him out with a job, a particularly shady job, even for thieves. This was not sanctioned by the Thieves Guild, but Theros didn't share this with his partners in crime. The three proceeded to rob the house of a nobleman regardless. While Straw stood guard, they entered the embellished manor, but before they could pilfer the home, two dark figures stopped them in their tracks. One revealed himself to be Symmachus, though Barenziah did not recognize him from their first meeting. The manor belonged to him, as he enjoyed high station in the Imperial army now, and was said to have the friendship and ears of Tiber Septim himself. He and his accomplice captured Straw and Theros and led Barenziah away so that he could explain his intentions. He told her of his part in the Imperial invasion so many years ago and why she'd been sent to Darkmoor. Symmachus confessed the desire of he and the Emperor to crown her as the Queen of Morrowind. It had been under military rule since the armistice, and they sought to strengthen their political relationships in the province. The idea of returning to her home to rule excited Barenziah, and she agreed to travel to the Imperial city with Symmachus. But her thoughts soon turned to her friends who had just been captured. She asked that Straw be shown kindness. If she was to be queen, she wanted him to have the farm he always wanted. She felt less sympathetic towards the Khajiit who had betrayed her, knowingly leading them to ignore the Thieves Guild's rules. Theros was lashed for his crime, and later he would be killed for breaking into the home of another official. With one last look at the Khajiit's severed head atop Riften's gate, Barenziah closed that chapter on her life as a young nobody in Skyrim. It was time to prepare for her return to Morrowind. The Imperial City was nothing like Barenziah had ever seen. The grand scale of Imperial civilization shined, not desolate like Morrowind, nor cold like Skyrim. On the road there, Barenziah had learned a great deal on what should be expected of her from Symmachus. The Emperor and I expect you to display both discrimination and good taste. Let me remind you, Your Highness, that you hold the throne of Mournhold not by right of blood, but solely at the pleasure of Tiber Septim. If he judges you unsuitable, your reign will end ere it begins, he told her. Barenziah began to adjust to her new life quickly. She had the pleasure of meeting the Emperor Tiber Septim early on during her time there, and took quite the liking to him. The two met regularly between her arduous sessions with tutors on matters of state and governance. These meetings pulled them closer and closer, which eventually blossomed into an affair of the heart. It's worth noting here that Tiber Septim was married at the time, and Barenziah was only 17 going on 18. She learned a great deal more from his stories and experience than she had from her tutors, and as things escalated between them, she was warned by the few who knew of the danger of her situation. Her rule was dependent on the favor of Tiber and his family. Making an enemy of any one of them was unwise, and a secret affair was primed with scandal. Ignoring them, Barenziah continued her consort with the Emperor, eventually becoming pregnant. Her brief year at the Imperial City came to an end with the forced abortion of her unborn child. A child of this relationship could not be allowed to exist, as a bastard could threaten the future of the Septim dynasty. The romantic relationship, as you could expect, ended here. Though he sent many gifts, the visits stopped, and Barenziah prepared to depart the city. She'd been summoned to Mournhold by Symmachus, who'd made preparations for her coronation. The crown she wore was ornate and glittered with 24 shining gems. Even thousands of years later, the crown would still be highly sought after for its exquisite beauty. The ceremony was as grand as you'd expect, mixing parts of Dunmer tradition with the growing imperial influence. This dichotomy was mirrored in the court of advisors established for her, half from imperial emissaries and half from Mournhold's elders. Though this came with its own set of challenges, Barenziah found it refreshing to be back in her homeland of Morrowind. She sought to make up for lost time by immersing herself in the history and mythology of the province. Her new station allowed her to finally connect with the long line of Dunmer that she'd been plucked from all those years ago. Despite the complicated history, Barenziah's relationship with the Imperial City and Tiber Septim remained strong for the rest of his reign. She'd only had a few opportunities to spend time with him on political business, but the two got on like old friends. The news of his death decades later hit her hard, but Symmachus was there to help her through it. The two had been friendly before, but this drove them closer than ever. They soon wed in a ceremony officiated by the new emperor Pelagius, a strong political and personal union for them both. Pelagius held great trust in Symmachus, and Barenziah was loved by her people. Together they ruled over a flourishing city through any crisis or problem that arose, save for one. Barenziah was yet to bear a child with Symmachus. While it's said that elven children are slow to come, their wait was unusually long. Barenziah feared that whatever method used in her prior abortion had come to damage her beyond repair. The two sought many healers and mages with no success, and eventually left it to time. They had lived long lives already, with plenty more years left before an heir would be considered urgent. Symmachus' service to the Empire was always required, and he began to take long absences to Cyrodiil. During this time, a young bard named the Nightingale had come to perform at the court of Mournhold. He sang songs of freedom and adventure that reminded Barenziah of her young years in Skyrim. She had him play in the court regularly as she was reinvigorated by his music. One night she was restless and called for him to play her to sleep. The two embraced as his seductive ideas of a free Morrowind swirled in her mind, but his intentions were not what they seemed. Unbeknownst to her, the Nightingale's sweet whispers were manipulations so that he could gain access to the mines of Mournhold. Inside was the Staff of Chaos, a weapon capable of opening gateways to other worlds and obliterating any living creature. The Nightingale was able to claim the staff for himself through this trickery. Symmachus arrived as the Nightingale teleported away with the staff, and he helped Barenziah cover up the severe transgression. Symmachus approached the scenario with unexpected forgiveness. "Barenziah, my dearest Barenziah, I expect you have loosed a storm upon the land. It'll be a while yet in the brewing, but when it comes, we'll weather it together, as we always have." While a storm was certainly brewing, it would not rain upon Tamriel for some time. Soon Barenziah would be blessed with the conception of a child. With great relief, the two welcomed their son Helseth into the world. He grew up a young prince of Mournhold, and Barenziah would soon have a daughter as well. Morgaia's birth came at the start of great unrest, much like Barenziah's own birth. Hers heralded disaster instead of peace. Mournhold's relationship with the Empire began to fall apart. The current Emperor Uriel Septim believed that Symmachus had a hand in the theft of the staff. He made escalating demands of them both in order to prove their loyalty. Barenziah and her children made the long journey to the Imperial City in an attempt to smooth over the recent troubles and left Symmachus to hold down the fort. He feared the people would soon revolt due to raised taxes and wanted his family away should riots break out before the imperial relationship was repaired. When Barenziah was able to gain an audience with the Emperor, the revolt had already begun back home. He was still and emotionless as she recounted the political situation. For over 500 years, Barenziah had faced many tough political meetings, but this one was different, eerie. She realized there was an illusion at play. Deep down, she knew that it was the Nightingale on the throne somehow. The Nightingale knew that Symmachus was powerful and well-liked, with a deep loyalty to the Empire. He was a great threat to the false emperor, and his preemptive strike to cause disruption in Mournhold had worked. Even the imperial force stationed there had turned on Symmachus. The man she loved was dead at the hands of the people he had hoped to serve better than the rulers before him. Barenziah was shaken by the news and unnerved by the Nightingale's place on the throne. That same evening, King Edwyr of Wayrest came to warn her of the impostor. He wanted to restore the true emperor to power by rescuing him from the other realm he was held captive in. Together they hatched a plan, and Edwyr agreed to protect her children while she attempted to distract the impostor. She wanted revenge for the death of her husband and to right the mistake she made all those years ago. Upon their meeting, the Nightingale revealed himself to Barenziah and confessed his love for her. He claimed it wasn't just manipulation when he seduced her, he fell as hard as she did. She saw her opportunity to manipulate him to exact revenge. She was willing to endure anything to find the wretched staff and relieve him of his unjust rule. After 6 months, she deciphered the location of the staff's pieces through her old thief ways. With pleasure in her heart for once, she left the imperial city forever, fleeing to Wayrest, where Edwyr and her children were. She could not be pursued here, and the king doted on her children like they were his own. Here they waited for Rhea Silmaine and her champion to retrieve the staff and end the Nightingale's rule over Tamriel. It's important to distinguish here the difference between Jagar Tharn's alias as the Bard, Nightingale, and the Nightingale Thieves of Nocturnal. It's entirely possible that this Nightingale alias for Jagar Tharn is in fact a fabrication of Barenziah's in order to keep the true nature of the incident secret. You see, the series of books Nightingales by Gallus Destanius tells of Draven Indoril, the Nightingale hired by Jagar Tharn to seduce Barenziah and steal the Staff of Chaos. It tells the tale of how Barenziah became pregnant as a result of this seduction, a pregnancy that she carried to term, but then abandoned her daughter, giving her to a midwife in order to keep her Jagar Tharn imposter story valid in the public eye. Being tricked and seduced by a powerful mage disguised as the Bard Nightingale is a far more sympathetic tale, especially when you consider that she worked to get revenge for her husband, supposedly. But the truth of it all resulted in a bastard child named Dralsi, who would track down her father Draven Indoril and follow in the footsteps of a Nightingale. Dralsi would have a child herself, named Karliah, who would also later become a Nightingale. Barenziah lived a long life and eventually returned to Mournhold after the death of Edwyr. She was Queen Mother as her son Helseth became King of Morrowind. Many believed she pulled the strings during Helseth's rule, though appearances would suggest she took a backseat to politics. Barenziah was an incredibly clever woman who managed to live a life worth telling and retelling. Through the many different stories told to the public, there may be even more going on than we realize. The tales of her life, both proper and salacious, helped make her one of the most memorable names in Tamriel's history. Barenziah is remembered as a character instead of just a name in the annals of Morrowind's royalty. And there we have it, the tale of Barenziah, Queen of Morrowind. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and do head down into the comments and let us know what lore topics you would love to see covered in the future. Subscribe for more awesome Elder Scrolls content. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.